Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. All right, my next guest, a very good friend of mine, does some redraft work with Gridiron Ratings, so obviously we're colleagues there, but he's also an expert ranker at Fantasy Pros. My man, Matthew McCarthy. Matt,
Hey.
Appreciate you coming on, brother.
Hey, no, trust me. I'm all about it. I'm ready to talk football kind of whenever, where and when. That doesn't matter to me. So I'm all about jumping in on a Friday night, talking some Titans I hear tonight. It gets I can tell people my favorite team now is the Titans because I don't tell anyone what my favorite team is. I see you got a Jets flag hanging in the back. So a little bit different with you, but I like kind of hiding who I'm a fan of. It's not the Titans, but I'm here to talk about some Titans. I think it's an interesting team. I think it's a little bit of a straightforward team, but I'm all about it. So hit me whatever you got going, cooked up for tonight.
Yeah, man, no doubt. I mean, Matt was awesome enough to come fill in, and so we appreciate that, man. We've had a last-minute cancellation here on our series, so you're not hearing from a fan like we have every other episode of the series. But it doesn't mean the knowledge and the information is not up to par, because there was a reason why I called Matthew. I literally called him and I said, "Hey, I need your help." And so my man was kind enough to come on here, and we're talking about some Titans, man. So the Titans overall last year, I mean, they had a pretty good season. They ended up winning their division, going 11-5. Their defense had some issues, but offensively, Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, AJ Brown, they all had really good years. What is the expectation? Obviously, we see the trade for Julio Jones. What is the expectation for the Titans as a team heading into 2021, you think, Matt?
So like I said at the top of the show, this is, I think, one of the more straightforward teams, but it could be one of the more, in terms of for opposing defenses, possibly a matchup nightmare. So when you add a guy like Julio Jones on the other side of 30 now, of course, coming from technically my favorite team, Atlanta Falcons. So we kind of get that in there a little bit. When you add a player like him, you haven't really seen a team that has two alphas like this. And I was talking with actually a good friend over at Gridiron Ratings, Jeff DiMatteo, about this today. This is kind of a very interesting team because who do you try and take away if you're opposing defense? Well, you just had a 2,000-yard rusher in Derrick Henry, a long-term elite option in Julio Jones, and a newcomer who was kind of breaking out to be a top 5, top 7, whatever it may be to you, sort of wide receiver in AJ Brown. Now, if I'm an opposing team, I'm not happy seeing this opposing offense ahead from on the other side of field ahead for me. You do have Anthony Ferkser, and we do lose Corey Davis, and there's a little bit of external options for the Titans. But currently, I think it's a very easy team. I think it's a very straightforward team, which so for me, who got a call 15 minutes ago to pick up and try and talk about the Titans, I'm kind of all about it. It's easy peasy for me because it's really, hey, you want to nail the big four. It's Tannehill at quarterback, Henry at running back, and the two big receivers in Brown and Julio. And really the other guys are just going to mix in, but those are we're going to try and focus on here tonight for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And let's just get right into it, man. You brought up Ryan Tannehill. He's been quite the quarterback since taking over for Tennessee as a starter. His numbers during that time even rival those of Patrick Mahomes. Completed 65.5% of his passes for 3,819 yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So much was made of the losses of Corey Davis and Jonnu Smith. But like we've talked about, now he gets Julio Jones. Also, Ryan Tannehill, something that I think was really realized last year because of a lot of the touchdowns. But this is a guy that makes plays with his legs. 43 rushing yards last year, 266 yards, 7 rushing touchdowns. Was the QB7 in total fantasy points at 21.5 points per game. Going off the board is the QB12. Matt, is there any value here with Tanny?
The thing I like about Tannehill, so a little bit further down the list in terms of overall top 12. So he's going to be my QB10 currently. I rank in terms of 6 points per passing touchdown, all that sort of metrics. He's going to fall into my tier 5. And that kind of tier 5 also includes Matthew Stafford and Tom Brady. a player who has changed the team but gone to an offense I think is going to operate really well in Stafford, and a guy in Tom Brady who's going to be 44. So he's mixing in a little bit of an odd group. Not exactly real big rushing numbers here for the other two, but Tannehill will get you around 250, maybe with the 17th game. Let's see how that all mixes out. This is a very heavy rushing team. Top 5 in actual rushing metrics in terms of, plays running the ball over the past 3 years. Top 5 each of the last 3. So Vrabel in that offense likes running the ball, and that includes Ryan Tannehill for sure. To me, Ryan Tannehill, I think, is one of the safest overall in terms of points per game sort of guys. Do I think he's going to have the 35 points explosions like Patrick Mahomes or Dak Prescott or maybe Kyler Murray and the other guys in the top 5 or 6 will do? I don't think so. But in terms of safe floor every single week, 20 points, I don't have to worry about, guys. There's very few names I would really put ahead of Ryan Tannehill, even though he might not have the real ceiling, because I don't think they're going to be passing 520 maybe plus times with the 17th game. Like I said, around 480 passing attempts might extend to 500, but not really much past that with the other game added on. So to me, Tannehill, if you're going to be going out and getting a guy like him, and his ADP is going to showcase that, to me, he's not going to be a guy that should be drafted in the top 5, and we're not looking at so. But currently, quarterback 11 in terms of fantasy pro ADP, you might have a little bit different ADP. I believe you said you're going 4 for 4 and all that. So I usually look at Fantasy Pros, but any site that has accurate information, use that. I like using because I talk more about redraft, and this is a redraft ADP. I'm the redraft guy for over at Gridiron Ring, so this is what I like talking about for sure. But Tannehill, again, floor is the real metric with him. I don't think he's going to be top 5 in points per game. So something to really just consider. But if you're a player who likes drafting safe floors and goes a little bit more risky with your running back options or receiver, maybe you're going with an early tight end, such as Travis Kelce or Darren Waller, I think it's very safe to go with Tannehill in those around rounds 8, 9, 10, whatever it may actually end up falling to you. I think he's a perfect option for that type of safe fantasy player who wants to pick up a player like Ryan Tannehill.
Yeah, I'm really into Ryan Tannehill this year, right? I mean, you look at I have him at the QB 10, I think as well. I know you said 6 points. I'm going off 4 points, but I don't think it's that much different. I have him 6 points. I can check, but Ryan Tannehill to me, like you said, the 250, 280 rushing yards, that's going to be there for him. And then if anything, his receiving core is getting better, right? You add Julio Jones, it could only get better. And like you were saying off the top, you were talking to Jeff DiMatteo about how are you going to defend this offense, and Julio Jones, A.J. Brown, that only helps Ryan Tannehill. It has to help Ryan Tannehill, thus helping Derrick Henry. It's got to help this play action game, which we know Ryan Tannehill thrives off of in this Tennessee Titans offense. The only thing people and it is somewhat of a concern, but I don't think it's that great of a concern as the loss of Arthur Smith, right? Because Arthur Smith is a guy that he is with your obviously being an Atlanta fan, but Arthur Smith is a guy that utilizes what players do best and really brings that out of them. And so is that play calling, was that beneficial to Ryan Tannehill because Arthur Smith was the one pulling the trigger? So, it'll be interesting. Well, something to definitely monitor. But if not, just hand the ball to number 22. Right, Derrick Henry was the RB4 last year in PPR points per game at just under 21 points. Had a phenomenal December like he always does. Also had a career high in attempts and rushing yards, 378 yards with the aforementioned 2,000 rushing yards, a career high 17 rushing touchdowns. Also had a career high 31 targets for a career high 19 receptions. Some people do that in their sleep, but we're not going to talk about that. Or maybe we will. Going off the board is the RB3. Any hesitation when drafting Derrick Henry, Matt?
I'm a PPR guy, and I like to think that PPR is moving towards standard. The old standard's not really standard anymore. It's really receptions. I think if he's going off the board at 3 ahead of guys like Kamara, Barkley, Elliott, I think he's being drafted at his ceiling. 2,000 rushing yards is an absurdly large number and something that should not really be happening in the current NFL with how many passing attempts and how heavily it is about air attacks now. At 3, I'm not very keen on that. Do I like him inside the top 5, top 6, whatever it may be? Yes. But third, for him to do something that really shouldn't be repeatable. My first article I actually wrote last year was talking about Christian McCaffrey. Now, McCaffrey, who had a 400 touch season in 2019, I was very worried about what his injury possibility going off of such a heavy workload into 2020. Now, Christian McCaffrey, I was unfortunately, that was one I didn't want to be right on. I didn't want to say that McCaffrey was going to get hurt, and he did get hurt. But Derrick Henry, I do have in the back of my mind, he is the oldest running back currently being drafted in the first round. He's going to be 27 years old. Barkley, Kamara, even Mixon, all these other guys in the top 10, McCaffrey himself. These are all guys who are like 24, 25, 26. Even, Jonathan Taylor is like, 22, 23. There is a little bit of hesitation thinking someone who's taking so much punishment over the last few years, because he's not going down. He's not going to try to avoid contact. This is a guy who over the last 2 seasons had almost 700 carries. They say on Monday after a football game, you feel like you just got hit by a truck. You felt like you were in a car accident. This is a guy who's taking extreme toll and punishment on his body. And this is a guy who's not going to go out and really catch as many receptions as we kind of want. Under 20 in the past 2 seasons, around 15 in 2018 as well. So we're not very much looking at him as a receiver. That's not going to happen. It's also, like I said, a low passing volume team. Is he still on pace to be the possible rushing champ? Might be him, might be Nick Chubb over in Cleveland. Yes, I think if we're taking bets today, I think that's the 2 most likely candidates. But 2,000 rushing yards, that's not going to happen again. For him to even have the amount of rushing yards that he did and was only able to finish second behind Kamara with all those amount of touchdowns he did have, and he wasn't even top 3 in terms of points per game. McCaffrey mixes in probably for sure with the few games he had over 30 points in all of those. I think we just saw Derrick Henry's best year. That was his career year. I think we should try to take a step back behind the other guys, even the Saquons and the Camaras and all that sort of guys. Is he still a first rounder? Of course. Not telling you not to do that. I'm just saying if you are going to be taking Henry in your first round, I think he's probably those elite or near elite running backs. I think I'm the most hesitant about being really excited to place on my team, because I know he needs to do something perfectly, which is score touchdowns, which they were so good at last year. 74%, they were in touchdown conversions in the red zone. If they got to the 20, 3 out of 4 times they were getting into the end zone. This is a team that's a low play sort of team. It's a slow pace, 22nd in pace last year in terms of offensive plays run. They were so overly efficient, which plays into a lot of what the Titans are, that I can't be overly excited to say Henry at where the price you have to get him. I think I want to reach for a little bit more upside in terms of receptions, which I know he's not going to. And there's a big injury risk. And there's a kind of more of a bland sense to him compared to the other backs up there. If he's so reliant on rushing and he's so reliant on getting into situations where it takes a toll on his body, and this might be the last year of Derrick Henry even at this level, I'm getting a little worried about him compared to the rest of the top backs currently in redraft formats for sure.
Yeah, when I put my rankings, my very, very, very initial rankings out June 1st, and I put Derrick Henry as my RB2. And that was based on a lot of what you were talking about, that volume from last year. I mean, I could play devil's advocate a little bit and say, well, the efficiency could potentially go up because of, the yards per carry with the wide receivers. Right. And I could also say that, hey, while it's not been an increase, a significant increase, his targets have gone up each year. And I could also say that this is a guy that, scored double-digit touchdowns each of the last 3 years, and he'll probably do it again this year. So, when we're picking this high in the draft, we're not picking the guy who we think is going to finish number 1, right? We're picking the guy who has the best chance, or just finishing within that top 4, top 5 of running backs. And I think Derrick Henry, when you look at what he provides on a weekly basis, I mean, there is that. And I used to do 2 years ago, I was telling people not to draft Derrick Henry because, there was this. He wasn't in games in which the Titans were losing. He was basically not involved. And so that was you don't want that from a running back. You never want that from a running back. And so Derrick Henry, I think when as I'm adjusting my rankings, as we get closer. And when I look at the top, kind of like what you're saying, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara. I mean, I'll probably take Derrick Henry over Alvin Kamara just because I like I want a guy who's going to touch the ball 350 times. Like just
It's the efficiency for sure. It's just I'm worried with a guy who 126 yards per game last year. It's just these are ridiculous numbers. They're like
yeah.
I just
Yeah.
want to really stress to people how crazy a rushing season he really did. This is
Yeah.
an abnormality. Will we see another 2,000-yard rushing season? I kind of put that question out to Twitter a few weeks ago, and people are like, well, there's the 17th game. I'm like, this is very much everyone's going this way, and the Titans went that way. They really went across the grain heavily in a way that we're not seeing teams do. Even in Cleveland, they're splitting time between Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. That was a backfield that's designed that way, so they have basically two rushing champions. Chubb could do so, and Kareem Hunt did a few years ago in his rookie season. I like Derrick Henry a lot. I like this Titans offense a lot. I just if I can really, there's a little piece in the armor I can chip away at with one of the top guys, I'm going to do so. Because I think just to people listening, I think it's very important to say I can't just fall in love with players because even Christian McCaffrey, different quarterback, kind of misses all, most of the last season. What's kind of the offense looking like with them? Does he still get such a dramatically large workload? Derrick Henry here, the same deal. Guys over 100 yards rushing per game. If he would suit up, he'd walk through the stadium gate, and he's going to rush for 100 yards. And that is so crazy to think of. That was just his average. And he's done this back-to-back years, and it's just something we don't really should be thinking of, in 2021. If he does it this year again, I want to confirmly say I think it's the last year he will do so. But without really having a reception floor to really fall back onto, because 30 receptions, 40, 50, between the yards that come with it, which are typically like safe for about 5-6 yards before the linebacker comes and creams you, just having just those extra points. One reception, I've seen metrics is like worth 2.5 to 3 times carries, because sometimes you're just crunching into the middle of the line and you have a nose tackle falling you. Now, Derrick Henry is a physical monster. He's like 6'5". He's huge. He dwarfs me, and I'm 6'2". He's a much bigger human than I am. But I don't like that he's taking so much punishment, and I don't like that these are almost statistical outliers when there's not stuff to really fall back onto. And a team that I know is so focused on it, but I'm more hesitant than I am guns blazing, because some people are all guns blazing for Derrick Henry. Unfortunately, I am not one of them.
Yeah, I think when it started out, when I initially did my projections, I was probably in that frame of mind where I'm guns blazing for Derrick Henry. But as I've evaluated it more and more, and just looking at the range of outcomes for all these guys, you're right. We're drafting him at his ceiling when we draft him this high, and so. What he did last year was phenomenal. And to think that there was like a buy low window with Derrick Henry, because I remember I took advantage of it in the league, because I thought last year was going to be the year that we talked about, because my thing was this guy had over 100 touches in the playoffs alone. And like I mean, I don't know. We could talk about Derrick Henry all day, I see. So let's go talk about somebody else I know I could talk all day about. That is the wide receiver position. A.J. Brown, my guy, finishes the wide receiver 7 last year in fantasy points per game, at averaging 17.2 PPR points per game, turned a career high 106 targets into career high receptions with 70. Also had 1,075 yards and 11 touchdowns. Dude is just a problem with the ball in his hands. Now he gets a running mate in Julio Jones, whose career basically speaks for himself. Suffered from some injuries last year, but when he did play, he was still productive. Was the wide receiver 14 in PPR points per game at 16.2. They're going off the board wide receiver 6 and 14 respectively. How are we feeling about these price tags?
I like the lower Julio gets, I think the more he's definitely a value. Because AJ Brown can really physically finish as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It depends on how much they really want to play into him and how consistent he is. Because there's a guy who can have 140 yards, and there's a guy who can have 21, 25, like he did a few times last year. There's just a really good upside for him to score, and there's really good upside for him to come down with big receptions like he did a few times last year. I like again, just like I said with Derrick Henry and Tannehill, I think it's a straightforward team. I love both of them. It's going to be such a coverage sort of nightmare situation. I do think Julio's health plays a little bit into it. Same thing. I was talking with Jeff DiMatteo about it today. It was funny. We're talking about Titans and then Titans show. Here we go. Julio is not someone to really play a dramatically large amount of his team's snaps. He feels a little bit like Anthony Davis over in basketball, where if you're watching a Lakers game, you're going to get a notification in the third quarter. Anthony Davis has gone to the locker room. He should be back in 5 minutes, but it's just still like, where is he going? Why is he hurt every single game? Julio Jones is the same thing. He hasn't really missed big time outside of last year. We did miss around 7 games. Hasn't missed since 2015 or so. We had a broken screw in his foot. Other than that, Julio is going to be out there about 70 to 75% of the snaps, which has been a little strange for a player who's been thought of as an elite receiver. And it's a little odd in terms of what does that translate over to the Titans, who kind of need a little bit more from in terms of their overall offense now to kind of really operate in terms of what they really want to have these two main dogs out there where you can't really cover them very equally and very fairly all the time. Because the more you sacrifice to one, the more it leaves either AJ Brown open if you're covering Julio. Julio gets open for a big reception because he can do that. Or do you sacrifice, some safety play and then, Derrick Henry's going to start busting up the middle. It's a coverage nightmare we're not really sure how to do because you never had a team that had 3 guys who could be such an elite guy at their position. Now, again, what's the overall volume going to be? We don't have Jonnu Smith. It would have been a little bit of a story if Jonnu was still there. Firkser, I'm not really kind of playing into much of what he is going to be. I don't think I'm on the same talent level of what Jonnu Smith would have been for the Titans. But Brown and Julio, Brown especially, I do like his wide receiver 6. It's a little rich for me. I think I'm around 6, 7, 8, but he's in that range. 7. So I have Michael Thomas at 6, him at 7. Right? Semantics. But Julio, locked on. I'm currently ranked as wide receiver 14. I had him a little bit lower before. I had him behind like Chris Godwin, CeeDee Lamb, these sort of players, right? He's mixing into a good group. These are all guys I can leave my drafts with as my wide receiver 1 and be completely happy. And that's really the idea. So even Julio at wide receiver 14, I'm still fine if I went running backs or tight ends or whatever I went early. I'm still completely fine as the number 2 receiver on this team, which still might only pass 485, maybe 500 times as my wide receiver 1. And I think that's very important. It really showcases that there's good touchdown upside with this team. We saw that. They were extremely efficient last year. Having a 70% or higher red zone touchdown efficiency is extremely high. The only ones who had higher were the Green Bay Packers at around 78%. And no team has really gone to 78% in the last decade. So Titans are in good company there with how easily they're able to score when they really mean it. The second thing is Corey Davis. Corey Davis might not be, in terms of talent, really on the same level of what Julio Jones and A.J. Brown are, but a player who could got around the 1,000-yard mark, and I was not a believer in him at all. I was poo-pooing Corey Davis all over the place. If we just saw a player in Davis who's not particularly overly talented, but still put in top 24 weeks, be ranked as such, and really deserve to be a solid number 2 option for a lot of fantasy teams on a weekly basis, because that's really what we got to start talking about too at a certain point, is constructing your team and having a team that you can match up really well against your opponents week in, week out. The Titans do that for you. There is a somewhat wishy-washy floor from Brown last year, but I think they're much safer this year because not having to draw as much real number 1 corner coverage, maybe double covering. You do have 2 alphas that you can put out there. I really, really I'm worried about opposing defensive coordinators just losing their minds and grabbing their hair and doing the whole like, what am I supposed to do sort of deal against against the Tennessee Titans. AJ Brown, first few rounds, love it. Julio Jones, maybe like round 3 or so, maybe, pushing in round 4, whatever he may fall. ADP that I currently have on these guys are AJ Brown, pick 22. So right back end of second round. And I have Julio Jones, pick 39. So that's what, round 4? So early part of round 4. I'm all about that. I like that. These are good values for these guys. I think AJ Brown in terms of how excited I am to have the player than to Julio. But Julio, at that value of where he's going, I think that's really, really good because I think a few guys around that place, especially the Tampa Bay receivers, I don't know if they were talking about on the Tampa Bay episode, but I think the Chris Godwins and Mike Evans that are going around him are a little bit overrated in terms of what maybe being a little saucy. I don't know what the episode was about, but I do like what Julio Jones is bringing in round 4 for sure. I like both these guys a lot.
Yeah, I think like you were mentioning off the top, the volume is probably the biggest question with this team, right? Like, I look at this Titans team as a team that's probably going to be competing for a division title. I think I have the Colts winning it, but they're going to win 10, 11, 12 games in a 17-game schedule. They're going to be leading a lot. And so are they going to be in positions where they're going to have to throw? I mean, I think to start the season, actually, I kind of actually am going to like contradict myself a little bit. They start because I was looking at this off the top. We were talking about Tannehill. They start the season Arizona, Seattle, Indianapolis. That's tough. But then the Jets, the Jaguars, Buffalo, Kansas City. So these are games where they're either going to be in a shootout like Arizona, Seattle, or even Indianapolis being a divisional game could have some shootout potential, or teams like the Jets and Jacksonville where their corners aren't necessarily all that good, and so you could take advantage of those guys, and then you go into shootouts again with Buffalo and Kansas City. So, there's going to be a lot of points to be had through the first 7, 8 weeks of the season with this Titans football team. And so just to get a piece of this offense, whether it is Ryan Tannehill or Derrick Henry, or AJ Brown in round 2 and Julio Jones around 4, like you're saying, I think to get a piece of this Titans offense is definitely going to be helpful on a week to week basis. You talked about the tight end position. Ferkser for me, Anthony Ferkser. I mean, he's going off the board according to 4for4.com's multi-site ADP as the tight end 26. He was 4th on the team in targets last year with 53, turning that into 39 receptions for 387 yards and a touchdown. Was 26 last year in total fantasy points. Ferkser was intriguing to me before the Julio trade, but I'm less intrigued now. Matt, you're nodding your head. What are you thinking about that?
So it's funny because what Julio did was I think we gained Russell Gage and Hayden Hurst over in Atlanta, and we lost Josh Reynolds and Anthony Ferkser over in Tennessee. It's going to be in a situation of they're going to be, 3rd, 4th, whatever on the team in targets. But it's possibly that like Julio and AJ Brown both have in like the 20 to 22% or so target share range, which is very interesting again for two teams to really have such a real focus that heavily. You don't really see those high target share numbers. Normally your true number one guy will get that high. Around AJ Brown's like around 23% last year. But Reynolds and Ferguson, Reynolds was kind of interesting at times in LA. I kind of was like, maybe he'll kind of come through as like the 3rd or 4th guy, and it never really super materialized. I just really don't think Tennessee thought that Julio Jones was going to land in their lap. I remember when Julio was saying kind of, I want out of here. I'm not really having a fun time. And I'm like, all right, I guess we'll just cry in the corner as an Atlanta Falcons fan. But, we gained something I think really interesting for fantasy. Tannehill, I don't know if I was going to have him in my top 12 if it was without Julio. But with him being there, you have 2 top 12 options. I'm a little worried that the average fantasy player might still take Julio as a top 5, 6, 7. I hope people are just, following us on Twitter and looking at the websites and checking the information out, because don't do that. He's not that. AJ Brown's possibly that. Like, we don't really want to work in guarantees for sure. But Ferkser, the ball technically has to go to someone besides these 2 guys sometimes. If you're, the Scott Fishbowl just happened, maybe Anthony Ferkser got drafted by your team. Not a bad situation with tight ends being the way they are. They're going to come down with, like I said, 50, 60, 70, targets, whatever amount of receptions that leads to. You technically have to throw the ball to other guys. It's going to happen. Sometimes the ball goes into the ground. So when you're working through, targets and impossible pass attempts for like projections, there's certain things you have to account for. It can't just simply go all those vacated targets that Corey Davis and Johnny Smith had, just go to Julio. We would love that. I would love just take anything Corey Davis did, add it to Julio, and add in a little Julio spice on top. And then, we got a top 12 whatever receiver. But that's technically not going to happen. I do like this schedule. It's a little bit tough, which is nice because you want competition. A really classic case was last year in the Baltimore Ravens. They had the easiest defensive schedule, and they had the second easiest in terms of like QB schedule. There was no real tough competition they were going to face. The defense kept opposing offenses to under 20 points per game. I don't think Tennessee is that strong a defense to really be able to do sort of that. They like slowing the pace down a little bit, like I said, 22nd in terms of offensive pace. But there again, efficiency is the name of the game. You're going to have plays that look broken. I think A.J. Brown and Julio can have those breakaway routes so they can take advantage of opposing defenses. I like this team. I like this team a lot. It's very boring and it's very straightforward, but I think you're going to have some nice weeks. And we saw some inconsistency last year with the Titans. I think you're going to have a little bit more of a upside that you might, because I don't know if I like to say Julio would have had a little bit more upside in Atlanta because they're going to probably be nearing like 600 pass attempts or so. But A.J. Brown, I think this is almost better for his overall floor than it would have been if we didn't have Julio there. I think I would have been actually a little bit worried about A.J. Brown if we didn't have Julio. But having Julio Jones and A.J. Brown together on the outside, I just can't say that, this is not going to be a top 10, 12, 5, whatever number you think the Tennessee Titans can get, because they were fourth in terms of touchdowns. Yeah, they're fourth. I think we're looking at another top 5 season offensively from the Titans in terms of those metrics for sure. John, it feels like the more I talk about them, the more I kind of like this team. Maybe not Henry as much because the top running backs I love in terms of PPR, half PPR. I'll kind of cop. I do full PPR. If you want a half PPR, move them up a little bit. Cool. I just think 3 is a little too risk. I think at 6, it's almost kind of a steal. If that makes sense, thank you for following along with my insanity. You can see that on Twitter all the time. I'm Methodical One. But John June, what are you thinking?
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm with you, man. I like this Titans team. I think there's a ton of value here to be had, and they don't necessarily look like the flashy team.
Oh, not at all.
But they're up there. As we go through the schedule, like they could score. I mean, they were able to score with the Chiefs before Julio.
Oh yeah.
So now you add Julio to the mix. I mean, I don't see a reason why they can't really compete here and really put up some points. I mean, I know you're talking about touchdowns and trying to see if maybe where do I have them from a touchdown perspective. Yeah, I've got them 4th in the league, 4th most touchdowns as a team. So, I'm with you, man. I like the Titans this year, man.
It's strange. They were also 5th in total team yards. Like I said, it's strange for a team that really was under 64 plays per game, which seems like a lot, but it's 22nd again in the league. I want to hammer that home because I believe in 2020, I'm going to try and bring up my my old stat sheets on them. We were in the same situation, I think, going into, last year. I was looking at Tennessee. I remember talking about, I'm like, this is a team that I'm not about because I think it's going to be boring and they're not going to do anything well. So they were a top 10 team in 2019, and they were 15th in yards, 1st in red zone efficiency. So they went from 1st to 2nd. So maybe they're 3rd this year. Who knows? But they were the 30th in average plays per game in 2019 and still were in the top half in terms of total yards, and they were 10th in offensive scoring. This is what this team does. It's just just a history of consistency and being able, if they're in the red zone, just punish you with Derrick Henry. Tannehill is such a difference maker when it got to this offense. It feels like something that's not supposed to work. And I like this because this is a team that breaks my brain. I remember talking about this in the 2020 offseason, where whenever I talk about Tennessee, I was betting against this team last year. I'm not doing it this year. A little bit Derrick Henry, just because, again, a little bit older, a lot of punishment, doesn't have reception floor, which is all, I think, fair points. But the passing offense, any little bit more than we expect them to do so, is massive. If they're this efficient on 480 passes, I can only imagine what 550 looks like. There is a ceiling here where we're looking at video game numbers. We're talking about them being, along with the Chiefs, with the Packers possibly if Aaron Rodgers plays, where I think he is, and in the Dallas Cowboys. I think this is possibly the next best offense in the NFL if everything goes right, and that's really, really scary if it goes right.
Yeah, the Titans last year, I mean, actually to start the year, they sped up and it was really interesting. I think it was like the first few games of the season because I remember tweeting about it because it was one of the things I was really paying attention to because there was not a lot of volume, and so coming into 2020, there wasn't going to be a ton of volume, and I'm trying to understand how could AJ Brown and obviously AJ Brown, he was my guy coming into 2020 and from the wide receiver position, and so I had a ton of AJ Brown. So it was like, how could he see these targets and Corey Davis and still Derrick Henry get his workload if they're such a run heavy offense? And I remember seeing at the beginning of the year, they had actually sped up their pace of play. They continued to slow down as the year went on, but again, I'm with you, man. The efficiency is the name of the game with this offense, and again, I want to be a part. I want to get a part of this offense, whether it's through AJ Brown, Julio Jones, Ryan Tannehill, or shoot, even Derrick Henry. I'll take it on because just dude, there's like I remember winning weeks because of Derrick Henry last year, and
Oh yeah.
it's not like he's a guy that, he does that every now and then. It's just like, no, he does it every single year, at least 3 or 4 times a year. He has winning weeks, and those help you get to playoffs and win championships and things like that. So I love that. But Matt, man, I don't want to take up too much of your time, brother. I know we pulled you in here kind of just off the cuff. So why don't you let everybody know what you're working on, where they can follow you, and what you got cooking, man?
So we just started up the Gridiron Ratings redraft show. We're doing it on Sundays right now. We're not really super pumping it up. So me and Jeff over there are really trying to get our cadence down, trying to work through like, hey, this is a guy that I'm going to be talking about once a week with now that I kind of just met a month, about 4 weeks ago. So same thing with you, John. We're, me and you got something, a little point. I'm not going to spoil that right now. But yeah, over at Grand Rankings, we still got to work through a lot of the site building stuff. So unfortunately, I have no written stuff right now, but I talking on podcasts is what I like doing more anyway. So once a week, subscribe over to the Gridiron Rings YouTube channel for sure. And so you can check our stuff out there. And on Twitter, I'm at Methodical1. I'm hoping to drop the one. The guy who has the actual Methodical handle is suspended. And I hope it's because of me so I can take it over. But like I said, a lot of stuff coming soon and into the season. So like I said, I am a ranker. I'm going to be ranking redraft. It's PPR with the idea of 6 point per passing touchdown. I'm an expert ranker over on fantasypros.com. But I said, you're going to be finding the rankings super duper soon. I think you're ranking for over there too, John, too. We're going to be ranking for redraft over on Grand Ring. So we're going to be hitting up with a bunch of stuff real soon. And like I said, I'm really appreciative that I was the person you turned to, John, when you needed a little bit of help talking some Titans. I hope we helped some people out. I hope the information was good. And I hope we all have a great night for sure. So, John, what else you got to tell the people about?
Yeah, man. I mean, look, you already teased something that we're cooking over at Gridiron Ratings, something that me and you were working on. And, obviously continuing these divisional breakdowns and, got a little teaser coming out tomorrow, but we're launching on YouTube, so that's exciting. All of our listeners are hearing this; they'll be able to watch this on YouTube, and they'll see the interaction that you and I were able to have. So that'll be cool. And obviously, yeah, like you mentioned, Fantasy Pros expert rankings. I'm not an expert ranker, but I'm trying to get that status. So going to be doing. I'll have my season long rankings over there, but I'll be providing them some weekly rankings so that I can achieve my expert status. So, uh, Matt, man, I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate you coming on, man. Everybody, we appreciate you. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will catch y'all next week when we talk about the NFC West. Peace.